The sun once never set on the Roman Empire, a civilization that stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the burning sands of Egypt, from the Atlantic coast to the banks of the Euphrates. For centuries, Rome stood as the pinnacle of human achievement, its marble columns reaching toward the heavens, its legions unmatched in their might, its laws and culture shaping the very foundation of Western civilization. But like all great powers, Rome's greatest enemy wasn't found at its borders, but within its very heart. Today, we tell the story of how the mightiest empire in human history crumbled into dust. Not in a single dramatic moment, but through a complex tapestry of events, spanning centuries. This isn't just a tale of battles lost or territories abandoned, it's a cautionary chronicle of how even the most powerful civilizations can fall victim to their own success. The Roman Empire's collapse remains one of history's most fascinating and debated topics. Some scholars point to the Barbarian Invasions as the fatal blow, while others see a more gradual decline rooted in institutional rot, economic mismanagement, and social upheaval. The truth, as we'll see, encompasses all these factors and more. Through the streets of Rome, in the chambers of power, and on distant battlefields, we'll witness the decisions, events, and transformations that brought low an empire that had ruled for a millennium. As we begin this extraordinary tale, remember that Rome's fall wasn't inevitable. Each crack in its foundation, each misstep in its governance, each shift in its society contributed to a broader pattern of decline. By understanding these patterns, we gain invaluable insights into not just ancient history, but the very nature of power, governance, and societal change. The lessons of Rome's fall echo through the centuries, speaking to us about the fragility of civilization and the constant vigilance required to maintain it. The story starts with the internal decay that ate away at Rome's foundations like termites in a mighty oak. When we look at the empire's decline, we must first turn our attention to the rot that began at its very core. Political instability became the empire's first major wound. The once stable succession of emperors devolved into a bloody game of musical chairs. In just 50 years, from 235 to 285 CE, Rome witnessed the rise and fall of over 20 emperors, most meeting violent ends at the hands of their own armies. This period, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, set a devastating precedent. The Praetorian Guard, originally created to protect the emperor, became kingmakers, literally auctioning off the imperial throne to the highest bidder in 193 CE. Imagine the chaos of a system where military might trumped legitimate authority, where any general with enough loyal troops could claim the purple. The spectacle of corruption reached unprecedented levels under emperors like Commodus, who squandered the treasury on gladiatorial games and personal pleasures. The imperial bureaucracy, once a model of efficiency, became bloated with officials who viewed their positions as opportunities for personal enrichment rather than public service. Governors in distant provinces operated like independent kings, siphoning wealth from their territories while neglecting their administrative duties. This political dysfunction led directly to economic catastrophe. The Roman economy, once the marvel of the ancient world, began to buckle under the weight of its own complexity. The government's desperate need for funds led to a systematic debasement of currency. The silver content in Roman coins dropped dramatically. By the 3rd century, what had once been pure silver coins contained less than 2% of the precious metal. Inflation skyrocketed. Diocletian's price edict of 301 CE attempted to combat this by fixing maximum prices for goods and services, but like most artificial price controls, it failed spectacularly, driving commerce underground and creating widespread shortages. Trade, the lifeblood of the empire, suffered as roads fell into disrepair and piracy increased in the Mediterranean. The complex economic networks that had once bound the empire together began to unravel. Cities that had thrived on commerce saw their populations dwindle. The middle class, the backbone of Roman society, found itself squeezed between runaway inflation and crushing taxation. The empire's massive size, once its greatest strength, became a critical weakness. Rome had expanded far beyond its ability to effectively govern. The costs of maintaining armies on multiple frontiers drained the treasury. Communication delays between the capital and distant provinces meant that crises often spiraled out of control before the central government could respond. The empire became too vast, too diverse, and too complex to manage efficiently from a single center. Roman society itself underwent profound changes that weakened its traditional foundations. The old Roman virtues of civic duty, military service, and personal responsibility gave way to a culture of luxury and immediate gratification among the upper classes. The wealth gap between rich and poor widened to unprecedented levels. Wealthy senators owned vast estates worked by armies of slaves, while free farmers, once the backbone of both the Roman economy and military, were driven into poverty or debt bondage. The military, Rome's greatest pride, suffered from systemic problems that would prove fatal. The professional army that had conquered the known world became increasingly reliant on foreign mercenaries. These soldiers had little loyalty to Rome beyond their paychecks. Training standards declined, and the legendary Roman military discipline began to erode. The army became more of a political tool than a fighting force, with soldiers more interested in backing generals who promised the highest bonuses than in defending the empire's borders. Equipment and tactics failed to keep pace with changing threats. The Roman army, designed for set-piece battles against conventional forces, struggled to adapt to the hit-and-run tactics of Germanic tribes and the heavy cavalry of Persian armies. The cost of maintaining the military consumed an ever larger portion of the state's resources, creating a vicious cycle where economic decline led to military weakness, which in turn led to more economic problems. The external pressures facing Rome grew more intense as its internal problems mounted. The barbarian invasions that would eventually topple the Western Empire didn't occur in a vacuum. They were part of a larger pattern of population movements and political changes beyond Rome's borders. The arrival of the Huns from Central Asia set off a chain reaction that would reshape Europe. These nomadic warriors, skilled in mounted archery and possessing a military sophistication that belied their barbarian label, pushed westward, displacing Germanic tribes who in turn pressed against Roman borders. The Huns weren't just another tribal group, they represented a fundamentally different kind of threat, one that Rome's traditional defensive strategies weren't designed to handle. The Germanic tribes themselves had evolved from the disorganized bands Rome had easily defeated in earlier centuries. They had learned from their Roman adversaries, adopting advanced military techniques and organizational structures. Many had served in the Roman army as auxiliaries, gaining intimate knowledge of Roman tactics and weaknesses. When they began crossing the borders in large numbers, they came not as simple raiders but as organized armies capable of defeating Roman forces in pitched battles. The pressure wasn't limited to the European frontiers. In the east, the rise of the Sassanid Persian Empire created a powerful and sophisticated adversary that required constant vigilance. Unlike the Germanic tribes, the Persians possessed a centralized state, advanced military technology, and a complex administrative system. The resources required to maintain the eastern frontier left Rome vulnerable elsewhere. The infamous crossing of the Danube by the Goths in 376 CE marked a crucial turning point. Initially allowed to settle within Roman territory as refugees from the Huns, the Goths rebelled when faced with mistreatment and corruption by Roman officials. Their victory at Adrianople in 378 CE, where they destroyed a Roman army and killed Emperor Valens, shattered the aura of Roman invincibility. This pattern would repeat itself. Desperate for manpower, Rome would allow barbarian groups to settle within its borders as federates, theoretically bound to provide military service in exchange for land. But poor treatment, cultural misunderstandings, and Roman political manipulation often turned these potential allies into enemies. The sack of Rome by Alaric and the Visigoths in 410 CE sent shockwaves through the ancient world. The Eternal City, which hadn't fallen to a foreign enemy in 8 centuries, was plundered. Though the material damage was relatively limited, the psychological impact was immense. The myth of Rome's impregnability was forever shattered. The Western Roman Empire entered a death spiral in the 5th century. As tax revenues declined and military forces weakened, more territory was lost to invaders, further reducing the resource base needed to maintain the army. Each loss made the next one more likely. The empire abandoned Britain early in the century, withdrawing its legions to defend Italy. But this strategic contraction couldn't stem the tide. The rise of powerful barbarian kingdoms within former Roman territories accelerated the decline. The Visigoths in Spain and southern Gaul, the Vandals in North Africa, and the Ostrogoths in Italy itself operated with increasing independence from imperial authority. These kingdoms often maintained Roman administrative structures and cultural practices, creating a hybrid civilization that would characterize the early medieval period. The final blow came in 476 CE, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, the teenage Romulus Augustulus. Though Odoacer claimed to rule Italy as a viceroy of the Eastern Emperor, the Western Roman Empire had effectively ceased to exist. The Eastern Empire, centered on Constantinople, would continue for another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire, but the Roman West had fallen. While political and military factors played crucial roles in Rome's fall, profound cultural and religious changes undermined the traditional foundations of Roman society. The rise of Christianity represented more than just a change in religious beliefs. It marked a fundamental shift in how people viewed their relationship with the state and with each other. Early Christianity challenged many core Roman values. The Christian emphasis on the afterlife and personal salvation stood in stark contrast to the Roman focus on worldly achievement and civic virtue. Christian pacifism and rejection of emperor worship created tensions with Roman authorities, though these would largely be resolved by the time Christianity became the official state religion under Theodosius I in 380 CE. The Church emerged as a powerful institution parallel to, and sometimes in competition with, the imperial government. Bishops became important local leaders, especially as imperial authority weakened. The Church's organizational structure, modeled partly on Roman administrative divisions, would survive the empire's fall and help preserve elements of Roman civilization through the Dark Ages. The adoption of Christianity as the state religion had complex effects. While it provided a new source of unity and cultural continuity, it also contributed to the erosion of traditional Roman religious practices that had once bound society together. The old civic cults that had reinforced social solidarity and political loyalty declined. Traditional Roman identity, built around civic participation, military service, and classical education, gradually gave way to new forms of social organization and cultural expression. Latin literature and learning declined in the West, though Greek culture remained vibrant in the East. The classical educational system, that had trained generations of Roman administrators, began to break down. The empire's increasing reliance on Germanic troops and settlers led to significant cultural changes. Roman dress, language, and customs began to blend with those of the barbarians. This wasn't necessarily negative. Cultural exchange had always been part of Rome's strength, but it contributed to the dissolution of a distinct Roman identity. Urban life, once the hallmark of Roman civilization, declined dramatically in the West. Cities shrank, with many residents moving to rural areas for security or economic reasons. The sophisticated commercial networks that had characterized the Roman economy gave way to more localized, subsistence-based systems. The transformation of Roman society wasn't simply decay, it was also adaptation to changing circumstances. New forms of social organization emerged, laying the groundwork for medieval feudalism. The Church preserved and transformed elements of Roman culture, creating a synthesis that would shape European civilization for centuries to come. As we draw this epic tale to a close, it's essential to understand that Rome's fall wasn't just about battles lost or territories abandoned, it was the result of a complex interplay of factors that transformed the ancient world. The timeline of major events tells only part of the story. 235 to 284 CE, the crisis of the 3rd century, with its rapid turnover of emperors and economic chaos, marked the beginning of terminal decline. 376 CE, the Goths crossed the Danube, setting in motion events that would lead to the Battle of Adrianople. 378 CE, the catastrophic defeat at Adrianople showed the empire's military vulnerability. 395 CE, the permanent division between Eastern and Western empires after Theodosius I's death weakened both halves. 410 CE, Alaric's Goths sacked Rome, dealing a devastating psychological blow to Roman prestige. 439 CE, the Vandals captured Carthage, depriving Rome of vital grain supplies from North Africa. 455 CE, a second sack of Rome by the Vandals further demonstrated the empire's weakness. 476 CE, Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, marking the conventional end of the Western Roman Empire. But these dates only mark the visible symptoms of deeper changes. The Roman Empire fell because it failed to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining its core strengths. Its political system became rigid and corrupt when it needed to be flexible and responsive. Its economy collapsed under the weight of inflation and excessive taxation. Its military lost its effectiveness through over-reliance on foreign troops and declining standards. Its society lost the civic virtues that had made it great while failing to fully embrace new sources of strength and unity. Yet Rome's legacy lived on. The Eastern Roman Empire would continue until 1453 CE as the Byzantine Empire. The Catholic Church preserved much of Roman law and administration. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced Roman authority in the West maintained many Roman institutions and customs. The dream of Rome, of unity, law, and civilization, would inspire generations of rulers and reformers. The fall of Rome teaches us enduring lessons about the nature of power and civilization. No system, no matter how mighty, can survive without adaptation and renewal. Unity requires more than force, it needs shared values and common purpose. Military might alone cannot preserve an empire. Economic health, social cohesion, and cultural vitality are equally important. Most crucially, Rome's fall reminds us that civilization is not a permanent achievement but a constant process. The institutions and values that sustain society must be actively maintained and thoughtfully adapted to changing circumstances. Rome fell not because its enemies were stronger, but because it lost the adaptability and vitality that had made it great. In the end, Rome's greatest legacy may be not its achievements, but the lessons we can learn from its decline and fall. As we face our own challenges of governance, economics, and social change, the story of Rome's fall remains relevant and instructive. The eternal city may have fallen, but its shadows still stretch across the centuries, teaching us about the price of greatness and the cost of failure.